Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Hello, Gamer Nation, and welcome to the Dice Pool Podcast, covering everything that you've ever wanted to know about how to run and play in the GeneSys Role Playing Game by Fantasy Flight Games. I'm your host, GM Hooly, and this episode we're running through the data stream of awesomeness that will take us from the darkest corner of the net all the way to the moon as we talk about the latest release from Fantasy Flight Games, Android Shadows of the Beanstalk. But for the moment, let me introduce you to the people who, if they were hungry for roast chicken, I'd slap a chicken 23,034 times, I think that was accurate, for my co-hosts and friends, Huzz, Flano, and Kaitlin. How are we all?
Doing well, but I just ate, so I'm good.
I was going to say I'm hungry. Get to it.
Right. That's a lot of slapping.
Well, you've gone and done it again.
I've gone and done it again.
You've called Shadow of the Beanstalk Shadows of the Beanstalk.
Did I?
Ooh.
Wow.
It's an easy mistake to
I
make.
keep doing that.
You did. And I'm
Right.
disappointed.
Wow.
I
Sorry.
thought you slapping a chicken 22,000 times was quite gracious,
23.
but calling Shadows of the Beanstalk,
Right.
Shadows, I've done it myself. It's spreading.
Oh no!
Contagious. But if people don't know what we're talking about with that chicken thing,
Yes.
look it up.
Yeah, exactly. Look at that.
Or make sure
With
safe
safe
search
search.
is turned on. Otherwise, the results might surprise you.
Yes. Very good. Oh, dear. So,
It puts a whole new definition on gobble gobble.
Oh my god, that's the wrong animal too. Chicken, that's a turkey.
oh, dear. We're all about repping each other tonight. So, Michael, what sort of gaming have you been up to?
Since we last recorded, what have I done? I've been playing a little bit of Aristea.
Yes.
I've gone on about that several times. I've
You
decided
have.
to try and promote that for a local gaming store because it's a great game,
Yep.
but people don't really know how good it is, and that makes you very angry and sad for them. So I'm trying to do a bit of promotion. The local gaming store that I play through, they've opened up a Facebook group for Aristea players locally. So
Right.
I'm trying to lure people in to my Aristea lair and get them playing.
So, just very quickly, you mentioned last episode that Aristea is part of the Infinity Universe. Is that correct?
It is.
I did not know that.
Sure is. Like, there's actually crossover between characters in Aristea and Infinity.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, my favorite is Dart, and she's both in Aristea and in my army for the tabletop.
Ooh.
Yep.
And I've
Cool.
gone that far down the rabbit hole with Aristea now. I've started buying miniatures from the general Infinity range
Right.
and putting them into my Aristea teams as alternative skins. So you pick this character, but then you can also pick which skin you like as well.
Cool.
Because I'm addicted to that. Apart from that, I've been playing a little bit of actually the Infinity tabletop game. But we're all here to talk about role-playing games. What have I done with role-playing? I ran a small generic fantasy game for my family last night, which is my sisters and their respective partners.
Yep.
And they seem to really enjoy it. It's the second or third time I've done it for them, and just using very basic GeneSys characters, no talents or anything like that. So they're just all based off skills. Because I don't get too advanced with that stuff with them because otherwise they sort of get lost before the minutiae of the minute little detailed rules and finicky stuff.
Yep.
I think you mentioned as well that you used the initiative system from
I did.
the 2D20
I
system.
did. For those who don't know how that works is all the players go first, then all the NPCs go first. And there's no rolling for initiative. It's just bam, combat starts and this happens. I actually had one of the NPCs go first, and I did that by spending a story point, and had one of the NPCs essentially initiate the combat by stabbing one of the players in the armpit with a sword in the middle of this ballroom that they were all taking part. The whole scene was taking part in, and it resolved that NPC resolved its action. Then all the PCs had a chance to do something as well, and then there was no rolling for initiative. It was all very quick and very easy. which is great for you got a new group of players. It speeds it up, keeps your attention more drawn to it. And honestly, unless your players have lots of initiative reaction talents, it's not a bad system to run.
Yeah, because you basically just go straight away. Like combat, there's no barrier to combat. You just go straight into it.
Straight into combat. So it's a good alternative. I'm not saying replace the GeneSys system, but if you want an alternative set of initiative rules, that's a great one as well.
Especially if you're playing with kids or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Another way, and like if you particularly want an NPC to act for a player, which I mentioned before, that's what story points are great for.
Yep.
You flip a story point and you have one of your NPCs take the jump essentially and go before one of the players goes. And it adds a bit of surprise when that occurs too, because it's something they're not planning for. But I digress, and that's basically what I've been doing.
Yep.
Cool, Martin.
We played Star Trek.
We played Star Trek last night. That was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun, which is the 2D20 system, which uses the initiative we were talking about there. It is a good system, but my love is always going to be with GeneSys.
Sure.
And we played Anthem, the new game out by BioWare.
Between loading screens, yep. We played
Loading screens,
which is cool.
It's really exciting for that 10-minute game in between the 30-minute loading screen.
The gameplay is amazing.
Yeah, the gameplay is rock solid. They're flying around like Iron Man on crack. Yeah, in the Javelin, that's the name of the suits. For those who don't know, is amazing. It's flawless. But there is things in that game that I have issues with,
which is mostly to do with loading and some of the interface.
Yeah, exactly.
But we are playing on computer, so that does affect it in some ways, depending on what our computer is. And but they've already started making adjustments to reduce these issues. So hopefully, going forward, we'll see some major improvements.
But all that aside, it does have a very rich setting, and I know we're discussing
I love the setting. Yeah,
how to be great, potentially GeneSys, or even I threw it out there. If you want a really fast and furious gameplay, it'd be a great 2D20 system as as
Yeah.
Well, they did that short movie, the trailer for that's being released. It's like a 10-minute or maybe 5-minute, something about that, but it even goes even further into the background and the history of Anthem, and just seeing that. Like it is like even playing the game is really cool, but then seeing it in a live action one, like I would want to play it. It makes really cool.
You know who directed that?
Yeah, old mate
Neil Blomkamp.
I can't remember his name. That's the one.
Did District 9.
I knew. I'm trying to think of the movie because I saw it and I went, oh, that's really cool. And then as soon as you asked me that question, I went, I knew you're going to ask me that, and I completely had a brain fart and couldn't think of the name. So it's old mate.
Yeah, it's a good old mate.
Yeah.
But that's what I've been doing. Apart from also deep in Infinity, so I played some Aristea and stuff like that as well. And we've got an upcoming game that we'll talk about later. What about you, Ian?
So let's see that I've run some L5R, which you people probably forgotten.
No, we haven't had the first gameplay session.
No, we had a short sort of prelude to what's going to happen, which was kind of cool.
Yep.
Sort of just an introduction to one of the characters. And we also did Star Wars, which was sort of we played immediatole after our recording of the last episode. And things didn't go terribly well. It's sort of, roleplay-wise, it was great.
It was a lot of fun, yeah.
But, that was, it kind of sort of ended the campaign sort of prematurely. But, opened a lot of doors for further campaigns later on down the track.
Absolutely.
Which worked really well. And then Star Trek last night. And then we're starting up another game with Mike in the chair. Which is going to be a lot of fun.
Sitting in a chair, correct.
Right, as the GM chair, which is going to be tonight, which is the topic that we're going to talk about for this week's episode.
So how about you, Kaitlin? What have you been up to?
I wish I could say I've been involved in as much RPGs as you guys, but fortunately I haven't had that much of a chance lately with work and everything else that gets in the way of the life that I want to lead. But yeah, I've been playing a little bit of Android. Managed to get some of the advanced of it last weekend, so I played it for the 10 hours that they allowed you to do for $5 last weekend. So I played that a little bit. Been doing that as well. And I have been playing a little bit more of that D&D campaign, which has been nice, fun, and socializing with friends and things like that. But yeah, I need more RPG in my life.
Indeed.
I don't think that there's the limit does not exist.
Well, we're certainly going to get that opportunity in a few weeks' time when we're catching up with you and everybody else in Gamer Nation as we head out to Gamer Nation Con in Plano, Texas. That joke never gets old.
Funny story. That's related to both the trip to Gamer Nation and Android.
Right.
When we were at the travel agent the other day, because we're flying to LAX.
Right.
Los Angeles. And every single time I would say Los Angeles, I would call it New Angeles. And the travel agent was just confused. Every time I'm like, yeah, we're going to New Angeles. It's like, I'm unfamiliar with that location. I'm like, well, you should listen to this week's podcast.
Then you'll understand.
Very good. Excellent. So should we talk podcast of the week? Kaitlin.
Absolutely. So this week we spotlight the Movie Defenders podcast. Now, we've spoken about them before, but on March 10, Chris Wick joins them to discuss Captain Marvel, and they'll be doing their Give Me GeneSys with him, where they'll be discussing superheroes. So join Scott, Donald, and Chris for what is sure to be an exciting episode for the Movie Defenders. You can learn more about this and many more podcasts on the D20 Radio Network by visiting www.d20radio.com.
I can't wait, because no doubt he's going to talk about his GS setting, which hopefully we'll be able to get an example of when we go to Gamer Nation Con.
You mean Aegis, right?
Aegis, what did I say? Aegis? Whatever.
That's pronounced Aegis.
But anyway, so that's kind of their Star Corps setting, similar to the Green Lantern Corps and whatever else. So yeah, I think that'll be very exciting. So should we get into tonight's topic, which is full of guns, sci-fi, and the dreaded net?
Dreaded? I love the net. But don't you mean core of the show?
Yeah, I do. Core of the show. And welcome to Core of the Show, the segment where we take a deep dive into a topic concerning the GeneSys Role Playing Game and, of course, gaming in general. Now, tonight we're going to be exploring the GeneSys setting book, Shadow, as I've been corrected, Shadow of the Beanstalk, which is the second formal setting released by FFG to go with the GeneSys core rulebook. So before we get started into what the book itself contains, let's quickly talk about what Shadow of the Beanstalk is all about. Huzz, since you are the resident expert when it comes to Android, Netrunner, etc., why don't you give us the rundown real quick?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I'm definitely a big fan, that's for sure.
Yes, you are.
Now, the Android setting, for those who aren't familiar with it, it's your generic high sci-fi cyberpunk. It's very grounded in realism, and they state that in this book, that they try and maintain a decent degree of realism where in this setting, which is great. But it does contain a fair bit of fantasy-esque elements layered on top of it, namely when it comes to stuff with the network, and that's their internet in the future essentially, and where you can live and breathe in that network as well as you can in reality. And in this network, you have your big artificial AI pieces of ice and etc. So it's very, very 80s hacker movie style interaction with the net. And everyone who knows what hacking is really like, you just sit in front of a screen with boring text scrolling up and down it. You don't actually fight big digital fire-breathing monsters. Although, that would be cool if you did. Android embraces that and makes it very much part of the system. It's almost like it's magic, I guess you could say. It's net running. You can get very fanciful if you play within the network a whole lot. But that aside, Android itself is set in a undisclosed distant future, or not too distant future, depending on how you want to look at it, where mankind has basically governments and etc. has really lost all of its power, and all corporations run the world. They pull all the strings at the end of the day. The government exists, but they don't really hold any really influential power anymore. It's all tied up in corporations. Now, the beanstalk that is referred to on the front cover of this book is the space elevator that goes up from New Angeles up into orbit which makes leaving the atmosphere much, much cheaper and easier. So ships can leave safely in zero gravity of space and go to the moon, Mars, to the asteroid belt where mankind has been establishing colonies. Now, the Beanstalk itself is situated in a megapolis called New Angeles, which basically takes up most of the region known as Ecuador. And it sort of spills across Northern and Southern America, where the lines sort of get blurred between the two nations, essentially. It sprung up when the space elevator was built, and essentially it became its own corporate-run city. So that's why corporations have a big influence here, is because they basically pull all the strings, which is great. The setting itself obviously sees the players playing amongst the machinations of these corporations, which are always trying to outdo one another whilst maintaining control of the city and keeping anarchy out. And there's a lot of anarchy that goes on everywhere throughout the city. You have people opposing the corporations, people opposing the androids, which are bioroids and clones produced by these corporations, which are taking people's jobs. So you have the middle class is rapidly becoming the lower class because all those middle class jobs are disappearing. And so all that's benefiting from this advanced state of androids is the higher class, because everything's being made very easy for them.
Because similar things aren't happening in our real world right now, are they?
Yes. No. It's funny when you read a lot of the fluff and lore in the Android setting. It's scary how much it sort of relates to what's going on today. But I guess that's what sci-fi has always been about. That's especially dystopian sci-fi.
But this is why the whole cyberpunk look. People are dressing that way because I've always been told you want to dress for the dystopia you want, not the dystopia you live in.
Yeah, true.
Very true. It's a good point. But yes, as for an RPG setting, the Android's great because it has so many layers. You can play on the top levels of this city called New Angeles, which is all shining spires and the beautiful life, or you can deep dive into the bottom layers of the city, also known as the Undercity. And that's basically the city of the older layers of the city that sort of fall into disrepair and are forgotten about, but are given away to the poor, and the poor is an ever increasing amount. So basically, all the garbage washes down, and the rich keep rising to the top. Essentially,
it's very much a hive city from 40K.
Yeah, it's got that feel to it. Yeah. But it's interesting because from the outside looking in, it looks like a very high polished city, and it's not until you deep dive into the dark crevasses that you realize how horrible New Angeles actually is. And I guess what I see a lot of people online asking is what makes us different from any other cyberpunk setting. Not a whole lot at the end of the day. It's still fair. It shares a lot of tropes, very similar to most other cyberpunk settings. You have corporations. It's a dystopian setting. All the usual tropes are there. You've got your hacking, you've got your street samurai, and etc. It all exists. But just like any other sci-fi setting, which it borrows from other sci-fi settings, it does carry its own nuances, which makes it uniquely its own. And in the case of Android, I feel it's more the fact that it's not limited to one city. The whole Earth is potentially reachable, and the stars are reachable. The the moon is also given away to a cyberpunk setting, and Mars, and the asteroids and moons of other bodies of space are also very much a part of this one setting, which is quite cool. You're not always necessarily grounded into one environment. Then there's Android itself, the bioroids and clones. You have these two things that are always a great sort of leaves us questioning humanity, a large part of its lore, and how you, as the players, deal with that. And that, I think, is some really, really good fodder for for RPG settings or RPG games, which carry a lot of high morality questions. And Android brings all that and delivers it.
Yeah. Because I think that, if you look at any of the Altered Carbon or even the Expanse to a certain extent, when we start talking about Lunar and Mars and the asteroids, it certainly has elements of all of that. So if you're wanting more of an expanse sort of feel, you could certainly move from the New Angeles setting, and there's certainly, especially towards the end of the book itself, when it has all of the setting information, which is a little bit different to Terranoth as well, that I found, is that Terranoth was very lore-heavy sort of at the start, and then they had the character generation, and then they had, like, NPCs. This has the NPCs towards the back, but all of its character generation and sort of like just very brief overview of what the Android setting is about is at the front. And then it goes into the midst of all the lore, which I think is a better way to do it.
It's because at the back of the book, they hyper-focus on New Angeles itself.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Instead of the entire world, the first like bit of the book sort of focuses on Android in general, like the other cities, other locations that are viable. But then the book goes, okay, this book is about New Angeles. Let's focus 90% of that on this one city, which I love. I think it's fantastic.
I do also think that an element of that comes from the fact that rather than building a world from scratch, we're very much grounded on this here Earth.
Yeah, true. And they use a lot of real world sort of locations and sort of scenarios.
So you don't necessarily need an explanation of geography.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's not a foreign thing. Yeah, absolutely.
And because there's a tighter focus, you can sort of give more room to those elements which are very small.
Yeah.
Like it's like as if a book was released for one city of Terranoth.
Yeah,
this book isn't. Yeah. This book isn't Android Earth. It's Shadow of the Beanstalk, which is New Angeles.
Absolutely. All right, so that's the brief rundown of what Android actually is. Now,
the briefest of rundowns.
The briefest of rundowns. Now, one of the things we should mention is that, unfortunately, because we're in Australia, there has been a little bit of a delay due to weather and other things going on. That we've only just recently, when I say recently, I mean Friday, and we're recording on Sunday. So we haven't really had a chance to take a really deep dive into the book. Having said that, we were also involved in the playtest of the book itself. So we've, some of the things that we've tested have changed. Some of the things that we've suggested have been added. And, obviously it varies from the final product. So we've got a little bit of a unique perspective, I guess, from that. But just from our initial impressions, because that's really all this episode's going to be about, basically how we feel about the book, what we've got out of the book, just from a first picking up off the shelf or having it arrive on your doorstep, because that's what everybody does these days, to give us a bit of a rundown as to what's actually in the book. So let's just talk about that for a tick.
But for those of you that are really keen for the deep dive, we are going to do that next episode, where we're going to have Sam on.
That's right. So we're going to have lead developer of the of this particular book on the show, Sam Gregor Stewart, because he's got married since we spoke to him way back in episode 6 or whatever it was, when we talked about the rules itself. So that'll be very exciting. And if you do have any questions, you can post those up. We've got a specific thread on our Facebook page as well as the FFG forums. So if you do have a question about the setting, let us know and we can pose it to Sam during the show. And as normal, don't ask questions like, are you going to release blah? Or something like that, because we just can't ask it.
Yeah, so if you do ask them, don't be surprised we don't.
Yeah, that's right.
We can certainly ask it, but Sam certainly won't answer it. So
no, that's right.
Either way, don't waste your breath. Ask some questions about the book itself.
Yep.
You've got Sam potentially here to answer any query you might have, or any rules question or a law question. Ask away. Future releases, just wait around. You'll find it eventually.
Exactly. Yeah. Patience is a virtue. But yes, so but in the meantime, let's go through the book. So, Michael, what was your sort of first impressions as far as like the first section of the book, which really sort of talks about the character creation, character generation?
Well, honestly, I think you're jumping the gun going to character creation.
Oh,
introduction, which is it goes from pages 4 to about 18 or so. Now it does, as you mentioned earlier, gives a brand new person to the setting a great idea of what they're getting into. if you're picking this book up or borrowing this book off a friend or whatever, read those few pages. It's very, very compressed, the information that's in there, but it gives you great broad strokes as to what to expect out of this book and the setting, and really potentially inspires you, I should say, to want to play in it, which is great. And not to mention, those first few sections of the book has some really, really cool artwork as well, which sort of helps set the tone. But as for that introduction section, there is a character creation. The character creation does bring a heap of new cool things, which I think we all love. And that's obviously, we've got the new archetypes, which are very, very cool.
Which are sort of, they're expanded from the archetypes that are provided in the GeneSys core book. Because there's, you've got archetypes that are mentioned in the setting information, the short synopsis that they had in or have in the core rulebook. And this expands on that, and some of the things have changed. Yeah,
they've modified a few things here and there, but they've added some cool ones. They've added the Cyborg, which I think is going to be a popular option for those who like to have a character heavily enhanced with bionics.
Indeed.
Then there's the Gmod, which is the person who has, which is a archetype who likes to genetically engineer themselves or genetically modify themselves. So if you want to play basically anything you can think of in terms of physical appearance, the Gmod's for you. And then you have, of course, the Loony. And the Loonies are the folks who are born and raised on the moon. And they are much taller and leaner than average earthbound human because they're used to the moon's gravity, so their body's adapted to that. And that makes them stand out. And I think that also, along with their cool racial abilities or archetypal, how would you say that? Architectural?
Architectural?
Sure.
Sure.
Archetypical.
Their cool racial abilities they have, they're also their fluff reasons that you can play an outsider in this fairly alien city is really, really cool. Adds a lot of role-playing chances there. But as GM Hooly said before, the clone, the bioroid, and of course the natural human that all appear in the GeneSys core rulebook also make an appearance here. For those who aren't overly familiar with that, the bioroid is a synthetic person, and they're very similar to a droid out of Star Wars. You can make their characteristics any which way you like, with a heap of XP. You start with 170 XP to play around with your characteristics. Now, your brawn does start at 3 because all bioroids are assumed to be at least that strong.
They're a bit sturdier. They're made.
That's right.
They're made of the good stuff. Yep.
Then there's the clone. Honestly, I think the clone is probably, from a role-playing perspective, playing a clone is quite interesting due to its lore because clones in Android are made in batches. There's no singular clone made. If a clone's rolled out of production line, just like a robot. So if you're playing a clone character, you either are playing a clone who accepts that they're a clone and becomes the Genteki frontman that they're bred to be, essentially. They're raised to be in the genetic labs. Or you can play a clone who's gone rogue. Either way, it's going to be tough for you playing that potentially in New Angeles because clones aren't considered humans. They're considered property, which means anyone can do anything to a clone, and the worst they're ever going to get is a slap on the wrist for damaging public property or privately owned property. So even though, yes, a clone is flesh and blood, just like a human, albeit perfectly crafted, they have no rights. So playing that is fantastic. I can see so many cool opportunities where the player clone is just walked up to by a police officer and butted across the face with his rifle. There's nothing they can do to stop that from occurring on a legal sense.
Wow. There are so many story tropes that you can throw in amongst all of that to really start looking at human rights issues and things like that. If you're wanting to go a little bit deeper into the gaming experience from a storytelling narrative sort of viewpoint. Very cool. And then we've got careers, and they do some really cool things which they didn't do in Terranoth,
which I love. I think it's a great choice.
Absolutely. So each of the careers have their own page, where, like Terranoth, they basically have the starting gear, which is a really cool thing.
Like packages, essentially.
Yeah, so you don't need to worry about, if you were to just start gaming straight away, that you can just go, right, well, I'm going to choose that package, boom, boom, and you're done.
Which is usually me, because I never know how to spend all the money. I do, but give me a couple of hours. I'm there to play. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's useful.
But the thing which I love is the useful talents. I think that is so useful. It gives you all the way through from 1 till 5, which I think's great, and it covers both GeneSys core as well as the Shadow of the Beanstalk as well.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So if you're playing a courier for the first time and are new to the setting and not too sure what would be good talents for the courier, it's presented with a useful sidebar which just says, hey, these are cool talents that you might want to take if you're courier. And it's a fantastic idea, and it's good that they've laid that out, because it sort of makes it so much easier for that new person to get into it, and it's not as overwhelming. So if you want to make a quick character, you could do a quick character in about 3 seconds, thanks to the talent suggestions and the gear packages.
Absolutely.
Particularly as well when you look at how many different places you can actually find all the different talents there are available for GeneSys. I know a lot of people have gone through and done compilations to everything, but you have talents in the core rulebook, you have talents in Terranoth, you have talents just people that have created online for their own settings. That would be cool if you want to allow that to come in as well. It can be really overwhelming because you are so spoiled for choice, and you want to make a cool character, but you also want to make a character that's useful in the setting that you are going to be in. So I completely see why they've added that in there, because that's one of the things that can, you can be so overwhelmed with choice. It can be really hard.
And asking Sam why the addition of that was put into the book might be a good question for someone to ask.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it would be a very deliberate design choice behind the scenes as to why they've done that and not do it in Terranoth. So it's interesting.
Yeah. And the artwork that goes along with each of their careers as well, very, very cool.
Yeah, it's sensational.
It sort of speaks volumes to exactly what the look and feel of that particular career is. So yeah, very, very good. Then we go into skills, which they don't have too many new skills. They cover their 3 knowledge skills, which is your science, your society, and the net. And then they go into computer skills, which, as they mentioned in the core rulebook, talks about hacking and sysops. So it's sort of like, instead of having a computer skill, they just have hacking and sysops, which is cool.
Hacking is for your, obviously, getting into by or through programs and security networks and etc. And generally doing something that's making a computer do something that it's not designed to do out of the factory. SysOps is the defense of computer networks and the creation of programs and whatnot too. So if you want to build ICE or icebreakers, SysOps is quite an important skill. So if you're run a character who's you're planning only to break networks with, SysOps is still a good option, because if you want to build or modify your own icebreakers, or even ICE if you want to defend your hacking rigs and etc., SysOps is equally as important as hacking. But I think some people might miss that if they're not paying close enough attention. So it's worthwhile investing, if you're a hacker, investing equally in both. If you want to be decent at what you do.
Now, because, as I said, we haven't had a chance to go too far into it, but do they actually have rules in here for crafting?
They do not.
So
they have
therefore,
suggestions, but like no hard and fast, tables or anything like that.
Yeah. So therefore, probably a good thing for people that have also got Terranoth can look at the crafting rules in alchemy. Which kind of could be used to, I mean, that's totally off the top of my head.
Probably a good basis to start from.
Yeah, good framework. Just reskin it as needed. Yeah,
because all of the ICE, which is...
would be templates to use.
What's ICE stand for, Michael? It's,
now you ask me the hard questions.
Something countermeasures or something.
I'm sure
like
some computer guy out there who's screaming at me right now. I'm knowing that off the top of my head.
It stands for Intrusion Countermeasures Electronics.
Look at you.
Just hacked in. Did you hack Google to get that answer?
I hacked it. Oh. I did the find function and hacked the system.
Very good.
Nailed it.
Yeah.
Very good.
You got it.
So
I help.
Got him.
But yeah, so all of the...
Also known as Hacker Man, just by the way. I need to change my name.
I'm in.
So all of the ice has a rarity. So,
and a cost.
And a cost.
And a cost, yeah.
So therefore, it doesn't take a lot of effort to port those crafting rules across.
No,
into Android.
You can even build entire adventure arcs by a runner requiring certain elements to build the ice and icebreakers, because that's cool fodder for a cyberpunk setting.
Yeah, absolutely.
You break into a warehouse to steal a particular computer chip to be able to do this certain thing. To get that chip, you have to literally go into a warehouse owned by one of the big corporations, and a whole story can revolve around that.
Or maybe you have to track down a particular
programmer
code monkey to get the right work done.
Absolutely. And then we start going into talents, and there are a lots of talents, and they're great. But again, on page 46, they have a table of all of the talents that can be used in this setting, which cover all of the stuff from the core rulebook, as well as all the stuff, all the talents in this book as well.
And there are really a lot of choices.
Yep. And there are 2 pages.
There's some excellent talents in here, like ones that we did in the playtest.
Yep.
There's also some new ones too, which I don't think we saw in the playtest.
There's a lot that we didn't see there, and every one is an excellent addition.
And you're going to see a few more of the talents that have been ported across from Star Wars.
Tweaked slightly.
Tweaked slightly for the GeneSys setting. Like Good Cop, Bad Cop. I love those 2 talents.
Yeah, they're good.
Parkour. It's back.
So yeah.
So I think it wouldn't be in GeneSys because it's in this book. So yeah, there you go. But yeah, there's some really good like hacking talents as well, and sysop talents, which make that's one of my biggest beefs with Star Wars was the poor old hacker didn't really do much unless there was a computer for him to hack.
Yeah.
But in this setting, because it's such a strong, important part of everything about Android,
everything's connected.
Exactly,
basically.
a hacker character has so much power in the setting, which is a fresh sort of take on it, and it's. I know during the playtest we had 2 hackers, one who specialised in sysops, one who specialised in hacking, and we were doing dual hacks. Where 2 players were hacking to the one system. So it's in this setting, depending on the type of campaign you're running, you could easily have two runners in this game.
You could easily have a whole team of runners.
You could. It's great for it.
But
similar to the movie Hackers with Angelina Jolie.
Do we have rollerblades and hacking pads mounted on our wrists?
We can.
I think we need to now.
Wow.
But
There needs to be an errata.
Done. Please ask Sam to include rollerblades.
Right.
But
I'm going to make sure that's on there. You know that, right? I will make a fake Facebook account. I don't care.
But one of the really good things about this as well is that it doesn't isolate the hacker from what's happening around the table.
No.
They're just doing something at the same time.
And I mentioned this, I think it was on a Facebook group for a general GeneSys chat where someone was talking about this book, and they were giving a quick review of the hacking running rules.
Yep.
And I said, these are my tips for doing that, just from my experience in the playtest.
Yep.
And one of them is, if you've got a runner in the party, make sure he's running. If it's an important run, make sure the other players are doing something as well. Yeah. And because, as GM Flano just said, both can coexist and work perfectly well in terms of game mechanics. You can have the runner doing his thing on his initiative and the other players doing other things on their initiative.
Yep.
And in the test play, we had a basically you guys were trying to break into a secure network in a rundown apartment in the Undercity.
Yep.
And as that was occurring, the New Angeles Police Department SWAT team showed up. So the other players who weren't running were trying to fend it off against the SWAT, whilst the runner was in one of the back rooms trying to hack into the system on a time crunch as well.
Yeah. So that was me. I was playing the hacker, and I think at one point I was hiding in the bathroom.
You were the whole time in the bathroom,
in the tub,
hacking in. Because that's the interesting thing about the setting when you hack in, or when you make a run, depending on the rig that you have when you're doing it, your entire consciousness is put into the network. Yep. So you were aware of what was going on around you, but you couldn't really interact with it.
No, because that's what going in deep is.
Exactly. Yeah. I remember one stage there was I think it was someone rolled a despair, and one of the SWAT team's rounds punched through the wall and clipped your character. And that upgraded your check on your next running thing. So an outside event directly affected your run, which is fantastic because you are getting hit by a bullet, which I'd imagine would suck, especially when you're trying to concentrate in doing some hardcore hacking. So yeah, it was an interesting fight, and it was so dynamic, and it wasn't just a boring hack where someone was sitting around rolling dice while the other players were just twiddling their thumbs. And that's a trap I think you can fall into if you're not careful about it as GMing. You have to make sure everyone's doing something.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. But no, that was a lot of fun when we did that.
But I feel we've digressed and jumped to like three chapters here. It was inevitable.
So let's talk about the thing that is probably my favourite part of this book. I've always been a big fan of obligation as a mechanic in Star Wars. Well, now they've sort of ported this across into favours.
Sort of, kind of, but not.
Made it better.
Yeah, I agree.
Way better.
I agree. So favours are effectively a way to get, initially, they're a way to get extra XP or extra money in the start of character creation. And then after that, they don't stop. They keep going. Yeah, which is cool.
They sort of become like boons if you've ever played World of Darkness, Vampire the Masquerade.
Yeah.
So essentially, as you play, you can take on favours from the world around you. So if you want a particular weapon and you haven't got the credits for it, or haven't got enough credits for it, you could say, hey, to the weapons vendor or the black marketeer who's selling it to you, I'll owe you a favour if I can have this rifle. And there is certain levels of favours, ranging from small to large favours. And obviously each type of favour has to be repaid with something of equal value. So if you cash in if you take a favour from a gunsmith, black market gunsmith, that gun might cost you a large favour. And later on down the track, the GM can say, hey, listen, remember that guy you took the gun off of? He's calling in his favour. And you may have to do a big job for him or some other task to pay off that weapon.
Which I think is a better way of doing it than the way obligation does it through an arbitrary dice roll.
Yeah, obligation. I feel obligation has its place as well. Like I like obligation in Star Wars. I really do. It's my favourite out of the three: the duty, morality, and obligation. I just feel obligation is one of those things. It can sometimes feel unnatural. Like I like to use obligation when I'm running Star Wars games. I don't ever roll any dice or anything for it. I just use it as for GM plot hooks. And I know a player's obligation is this. If I wanted to inject it into a story somewhere, I will. But I'm not going to get hung up on a dice roll to see if it comes into play.
But that's exactly what this system does, just naturally.
It does. And it's a good fit. You could easily take this from here, chuck it into our Star Wars Edge of the Empire campaign, remove obligation entirely, and it'll work perfectly.
And the other good thing about this is that it's more tempting for the players to want to take on favours.
Exactly.
Because you don't run the risk of losing the ability to spend XP or things like that. You can just get under a crushing debt, and then the rest of the campaign could be digging yourself out from underneath.
Well, like in this book, it suggests that if a player takes on obligations and reneges on repaying, not obligations, sorry, favours. If a player reneges on repaying his favours, people may stop giving them favours in the future. So you have entire factions who are like, no, we're not going to offer you anything anymore. And that could be a case of they refuse to even deal with you. So if you get the hard credits, they're like, well, normally this gun will cost you 500 credits, but because it's you, it might cost you 1,500 credits because you haven't repaid any of the favours that you owe.
Or they just won't sell.
Get
out.
Exactly. But it's something more insulting by raising the price to an obscene amount.
Yeah, true.
And also, that's a really handy way of using despairs if it ever comes up in social encounters as well. Particularly if they do have a lot of debt. It's a really cool way of adding that narrative to it with using that system.
Absolutely.
Now, I recommend that a GM gets some sort of like Excel spreadsheet to keep track of the favours, just to make it easier for themselves. It also suggests in the book that a player doesn't gain any more than 6. Or gain any more than 6 favours. And that's not a hard limit. That's just an FFG recommendation. So if you're capable of keeping track of it, and your players are capable of keeping track of it, they can have an infinite number of favours.
But
I keep going to say obligation.
As a storyteller, I would probably suggest if they're getting to about 6, start calling them in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're not calling them in, you're probably doing something wrong with the overall setting, because that's effectively what runs the economy of the Android setting. Is
the shadows.
Yeah, of the shadows. Yeah,
And there's nothing as well that stops if one of your players owes 3 small favors to a certain person or faction,
Yeah.
they can cash that in as one big favor.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing about the favors. There's no hard number crunch to it.
Yeah.
So you can, in certain narrative scenarios, you can sort of cash them in at a different sort of economy value, I guess, which is really cool.
yeah. Now, the thing which links into favors is factions.
Yes.
Which is a huge section of the book. And there's a lot of lore and whatever else that goes into that. But
It's a very, very clever. I like this section of the book a lot because it's a very, very clever integration of lore and game mechanics.
yes,
You don't see that very often because usually the two are fairly separated in most RPG books. But in this one, it gives you a really, really good write up for each of the major players of the Android setting, the main corporations, the various org crime, etc. And if you're brand new to it, even if you are experienced with the Android setting, you get a lot. I feel you get a lot more intimate sort of understanding of those factions through this section of the book, which is great. But as you were saying, sorry, I interrupted you with my fandom.
no, it's all right. But I mean, the thing, it's sort of just basically, it's coming back from what you've just said there, is that in each of the factions, where they talk about, as you say, organised crime, they talk about the NBN, they talk about street gangs and whatever else, they give a list of some of what a favour might look like. And it has the 3 tiers, the small, regular and big favours, and says exactly what those sorts of favours might be to those organisations.
Which is awesome.
Which is very, very cool.
Well, it's worth mentioning as well, at character creation, it's up to you to decide if your character belongs to a faction. Now, you don't have to belong to a faction. You can be completely factionless. Now, factions doesn't mean you're a hard and fast, loyal member of that particular faction. It just means you work. At the very least, it means you have close associations with them in some way, shape, or form. Like if your faction is Genteki, you're not necessarily a Genteki, corporate board member or anything like that, but you could be someone who works closely for one of their subdivisions or something like that. And so much so that you can pull some weight in some way, shape, or form with that particular faction, which is really cool. So it's not hard tying into a faction where you might, at first glance, you might think it's trying to do. It's not at all. So you can play a bunch of street thugs who may have a close faction ties to, I use Genteki again, because one of the street thugs might do some, unofficial work for a Genteki CEO, for example, or something like that. But there is a actual game mechanic here, and it's easily missed. And it's on page 55. I thought I'd mention this because I was reading it the other day. If you are a part of a faction, once per session, you may spend a story point to have someone else in your faction perform a small favour or regular favour for you, which is very, very, very cool. That's just once per session, all the time, which is really handy story point talent to have.
So it's good to be a part of a faction.
Yes. However,
Yeah.
there is a however. Once per session, your GM may spend a story point to have someone else in your faction request you perform a small favour or regular favour. This must be completed by the end of the session.
Nice.
So it's a good balancing act right there. So faction play.
And narrative.
Very
fun.
narrative.
Lots of narrative fun that can be had with that.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that sounds very similar to what L5R have got with each of their clans. Is that, you may have a particular task that your daimyo has gone and asked you to do, but each of the clans have a specific thing in mind, and all that it's going to require is, the GM to flip a story point to make sure that one of those PCs is doing completely against what the rest of the party may be trying to do.
Yep.
So it almost creates a bit of a paranoia sort of feel as well.
That's one way you could definitely use it for sure. Which is great. But also can mean a GM, if he's stuck for story ideas, for a particular session, what he can do is flip one of those, start a session, go, look at what I'm doing. I'm flipping this. Now the player tied to that faction has to complete that task by the end of the session. Now, you might get stuck for ideas and how they might actually complete it. But then you can use the specific favor examples in the faction sections as your plot hook generators. So, for example, my character is he's a part of the Hasbioroid faction. Okay, you as GM say, hey, I'm flipping this. Now you owe someone out there, an NPC, a favor for that faction.
Yep.
Using your power within the faction to pull the strings to make that favor occur. So you can look at the small favors or the regular favors. So on page, we'll use it for example, for those reading along at home, page 59, you have the Hasbioroid specific favors. Regular favors, I'll read the very first one, provide information about corporate security. So that's your session right there. That player has to get into the Hasbioroid corporate security sector somehow and provide the information to the NPC who has requested it just by a story point flip.
Yep.
So you require no other pre-established story other than they get a message from some unknown person saying, hey, can you do this for me? Or because the GM has flipped a story point.
Yep.
And you've got a whole session right there of that one example favor, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, and you could almost sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? You could make it look like that it's just some small favor that you're getting them to do, but in actual fact, the GM has already got this overall plan of, what's going to happen further on down the track. And then sort of every second session or third session that another sort of small favour might come about. And then all of a sudden there's a medium or a regular favour.
Yep.
And then suddenly you've got this massive big favour that comes in and go, hang on a tick, this is what we've been doing all along. To build that narrative.
And I think as well, it's important to remember when you're looking at these types of cyberpunk settings, or even just the settings where you're in the shadows and living life on the street, essentially, like that's how the world runs. It's a really interesting mechanic in order to display that feeling that you have of that in order to get out of where you are or what you're doing, you have to do favors for these people and the big like higher ups or things like that. It is it's essentially the way the world works when you're, pushed under the thumb of the big guy kind of thing. Like I think one of the best examples, even like I know we're talking, and this is the Android setting and this is Shadow of the Beanstalk, and I know we talked about this when we were talking about Terranoth, but these rules that they have here can be used in any type of cyberpunk setting or any type of just thinking of reading and going through them. There's so many, but one of the big ones was Alita Battle Angel I was thinking of, which by the way, I haven't seen it. I'm not going to say any spoilers, but I would recommend. It's a lot of fun. But a lot of it is that they are under this massive tower and they have to try and do some really horrible things just in order to try and have a better life for themselves or just to survive, or and those are all deals with and making favors with people that come up throughout the story. And how one person she met on the side of the street is dealing favors, and that interacts with this random character that you've just met, and it all kind of ties in really nicely narratively all through doing favors, and that is what that narrative system is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love it. For those very reasons, because money can only get you so far.
Absolutely.
Which is cool. And it also gives the players a little bit of like power early on when they haven't got much power.
Yeah.
Means they can choose to take on a favor of their choice, and they're going to immediately get something from that. There's going to be strings attached, but it gives players that influence without having to worry about counting coins, which I think is great.
And it also gives the players the opportunity to develop notoriety and reputation as their characters grow up, gain XP as well, right? It is something that, the way the world works, but, the more jobs that you do or the more favors and the bigger favors that you have for the type of organization you have, it's a really nice way and a really good way of narrative way of allowing your characters to climb the ranks, essentially. And the more favors, and as the story goes on, like, you never know, they might actually be meeting with the big boss because they've been doing all these jobs and things like that. It's a good way of doing that and not making it feel unnatural.
Yep,
absolutely.
And as you just said, like it evolves the story. It like means that you could pull a small favor with some random guy in session 1, then session 20 comes along, and you've somehow through the chain of events are now closely working with some sort of mega corporation who's it's just how the story's gone, or you've made a villain of a mega corporation. It's the one little thing can just butterfly effect out so much, and I think that's what this favor economy really helps set up, establish.
Absolutely. So that's Favours. A big chunk of the book.
Talk about that forever, I think.
We could.
Honestly, the favour system was a surprise to me. When we got the playtest, I wasn't expecting anything like that.
Yep.
Like an obligation type system, because Terranoth didn't do it. But when we got this, I was like, wow, that's actually really, really cool.
Yeah. No, I love the idea, and I'm glad they included it.
Yep, absolutely. And as you say, it's a really good section that sort of brings in that sort of the flavour feel and obviously the lore, but mixing it with rules. Absolutely fantastic. So let's talk equipment, which is talking about Chapter 2.
And vehicles.
And vehicles. Yes, very good. So it talks a little bit more about the favour economy and how that works.
Yeah, it gives more of a hard, crunchy breakdown of how that works mostly for the player and the GM alike. So if the Chapter 1 gives a summary of it, then Chapter 2 gives you a hard, crunchy. This is how it works. Sort of feel to it, just to help solidify it, I guess.
Yep. And their equipment section is quite large, as you can expect, for a sci-fi setting. Lots of choices there, which are really quite cool.
Which I might add starts, like page 79 it starts at, and like slap bang middle of page 79 is a piece of artwork, which I think really, really helps sort of set the scene for the upcoming chapter.
Yeah.
It has a like a street punk being like cybernetically enhanced. Yes, but in like a street sort of vendor. Very, unofficial surgery that's taking place.
Yeah,
but it sort of gives you that whole vibe of it, which I think is fantastic.
Because it's kind of, to me, it's as though that, like when you go to a tattoo parlor and whatever else these days,
so casual.
It's so casual, and then it's like, oh, you'd like some cyberware? Sure, just pull up a pew. Yeah,
let's just quickly bolt this leg onto your hip.
It's very, very cool. And my favourite bit when it comes to all of the gear is all the cyber hacking stuff. I love net running. It's great. Even though that I'm not going to be playing a Netrunner in your upcoming campaign.
No, never say never. We haven't done session 0 yet.
No, that is true.
So you might all change your minds
indeed.
Be all become Netrunners and then be my bane. But it does introduce a heap of cool ranged weapons and melee weapons, which I think is very, very appropriate for the setting. Some of them are borrowed from the core rulebook, then a lot of them are also added or enhanced. Again, it doesn't give you super specific details on what they are. An assault rifle is an assault rifle, so you can, as the GM or player, reskin that to be whatever you like, which I think is great. It doesn't shoehorn you into super focused selections. It does bring some pretty nasty Fletcher, which are flechette weapons, into the setting. And I know GM Flano during the playtest was a fan of them because basically they crit like crazy with their Vicious 3. So combine that with a few talents and you could just be high critting targets all day of no effort at all.
Ouch.
Which is pretty cool. But I think my favourite is the heavy Gauss rifle. That's under the fire support weapons, because who doesn't like a Gauss rifle? It's breach 1, cumbersome 5, and slow firing with damage 15. So basically against fleshy targets, it's ignoring all soak and just doing a lot of damage.
Yeah, you only need the one shot with that.
But let's not completely skip the melee weapons. I believe someone on a Facebook group somewhere, because I lose track of them all, mentioned the charged crystal katana, which is what you need if you're building a street samurai for this setting, because the name says it all.
Right.
Charged crystal katana. You know what that weapon does? I don't even need to read the stats out to you. It's pretty good. I'm waiting for GM Flano to break it.
I mean, it's not hard.
It's going to happen.
Yeah, it's going to happen.
They've also got rules for addiction, which is in there as well, which is kind of cool. They've obviously got all of, as I mentioned before, they've got all the net gear and whatever. They've also gone to bucket loads of cybernetics,
which makes sense.
Which is obviously makes sense as far as well as Gmod installation.
Yeah, Gmod's probably the newest new, because if you're familiar with Star Wars, cybernetics are old hat. But Gmod installations is brand new to the setting.
Yep.
Basically, it's genetic crafting of the human body, and basically imagination is your limitation. A lot of Gmods can just be purely cosmetic. If you want blue skin with elf ears, that's not going to bring any potentially any mechanical buff, but it makes you look unique in the setting. So the GM doesn't have to worry about getting to the hard crunchiness of superficial Gmods.
Yeah.
But there is a heap of Gmods that are much more crunchy. And there's some really, really cool ones in there. I think anyone who wants to build a unique, cool character could certainly do, like such as enhanced hearing, cat claws. So you can basically grow claws out of your nails. And that, again, you can reskin that to whatever way you like. If you want velociraptor claws on your toes, that could also be your cat claws. And then you can make infinite clever girl puns all the time if you do it that way.
Look, as far as using this in other settings as well, you could even start looking at some of that stuff in superhero settings for, if you've got cat claws, well then, depending on what it is, you could be very, very similar to a Wolverine type character as well. So,
absolutely.
So, yeah.
Now, it's worth mentioning that Gmods do have an installation rules for installing them on the body.
Right.
It is possible to fail having a Gmod take on your body, and if that happens, you waste all the credits that are spent.
Yep.
And it's possible through the rolling of lots of threat or despair to have a Gmod cause a mutation on the body, which will permanently decrease your strain or wound threshold of the player's choice. So you have to be careful with Gmod installation because you can flub the roll and be a little bit gummy afterwards.
Can we just talk very quickly about Gmods? Because I know that we mentioned it, and this is sort of, as you said, it's the new kid on the block. But Gmods is kind of like people who are in this day and age, who are into body modification and things like that. It's kind of taking that from a narrative perspective. That's kind of taking that to the next level.
Yes and no. Like there is obviously there's people out there in the Android setting who Gmod for the
for the aesthetics.
The aesthetics, the trend.
Yeah.
Yep.
The trend of it. There's also Gmodding for practical purpose, and there's also Gmodding to make the perfect biological weapon.
Well, if you're looking for a real world equivalent, there was I think it was a Chinese scientist which succeeded in modifying the genome of 2 children,
right,
to make them resistant to HIV.
Oh wow!
They've been born.
Yeah.
But because that's a breach of all sorts of international laws, he's on the run. But that was the last time I checked. It may have changed, but we can do these sort of things now. It's just not
accepted
or easily achievable.
Easily done,
Wow.
Because there could be
that is a storyline waiting to happen.
But the problem is that there's so many unintended possible consequences. Now, in this, that's mostly been, or at least the corporations will tell you, that's mostly been negated.
Yep.
But then, as you say, there's the potential to really stuff up your genetics and permanently lower your strain threshold.
Yeah.
Particularly if you get me rolling.
I'm just thinking about the idea of an adventure where somebody's done exactly that, except that they've made them genetically immune to a virus, and then the virus gets dumped in a particular area of the Undercity.
Yeah.
And then people start dying en masse, except for these people who somehow are managing to live, and they're all sort of clones.
Or there's actually a cult who genetically modify themselves to be impervious to an attack they're planning on the city.
Yeah.
So they drop this, horrific viral bomb, and it kills everyone except for the cult members.
Yeah.
Because they've survived with the genetic enhancements to stop it.
Yep.
Or another cool story hook is to have a genetic virus spread through the lower parts of the city, which actively mutate people, but in horrible ways.
Oh, wow!
Yep.
So there's some.
I want to play.
There's some adventure seeds for you. Just straight off the top of your head.
Speaking of adventure seeds, I'm going to throw this out there before I forget about it.
Sure.
If you have access to any of the Netrunner cards, or they're all online, so everyone has access to them.
Yep.
Look into the Netrunner agenda cards. The agenda cards are basically the idea when you're playing the Netrunner card game, you as the runner want to try and steal agendas off your corporations, and the corporation wants to try and score these agendas. And these agendas essentially, nefarious sort of acts that the corporations are trying to get passed through without anyone noticing.
Right.
And they are endless, and I mean endless.
Because there's a lot of them.
Endless plot hook ideas off those cards.
Okay.
In the test play we did,
Yep.
that whole thing of mine came from one card.
Wow.
From there. And
That's cool.
they're just, all they are is because each card gives you a title of what it is,
Yep.
a brief one line fluff description, but because it's so well designed that will create an infinite number of ideas in your head, and you can create an entire session, an entire adventure arc based off one of those agendas.
Yeah, it's that high level idea of what's going on in the background that players may never actually get to.
Or they actively are trying to get to it. Because the way I described it to one of my friends who I play Netrunner with, who doesn't play any RPG, I described it, you can do an entire campaign arc, which is just the non-high view of a Netrunner run. Because in Netrunner, you make runs to try and score these agendas, which mostly involve hacking, but your hacking is advanced by all these outside resources, people, personnel, equipment, etc. It's a very high level sort of like perspective of what's going on. But one role-playing campaign adventure arc to score that one agenda is basically sessions of fodder. But it's in card game terms, it's one turn of play.
Yeah.
That's cool.
It's very, very cool.
So there you go. So, yeah, definitely look for that resource.
Yes.
Perhaps.
Any of the card games. Any Netrunner cards, but most of the agenda cards will just give you a million ideas.
Wow.
New gear, new icebreakers. If you as a GM want to create more stuff that's not in this book, because there is a lot in the cards that they obviously can't fit in this book, because if they did, then the book would be 4 times larger than it actually is. Look at those cards and then start creating your own pieces of gear and equipment as well, using the theme that's given on those cards.
Very cool. Other things that they've basically got is item attachments, which is very, very cool. Very similar. Well, in actual fact, they're pretty much identical to some of the Star Wars ones. They've got armor attachments, weapon attachments, and they've got a good selection there, which can obviously be modified as well. We then go into ships and vehicles, which they give a good smattering of. They give a bit of a rundown, then the stats themselves. Then they take one particular model and they give it like a bit of an elevator pitch for each of the vehicle types, which is really cool.
And they go all the way up to our space vehicles too, it's worth mentioning, including a space starfighter essentially. And it's interesting, you look at the price and rarity, it's got a very different scale to Star Wars, where one fighter in Android is 7.5 million credits. So it's very, very, very out of reach for the average Android character to ever obtain, which I think is great.
As opposed to like a Z95, which is, like 35,000 or whatever it is. Yeah.
It's got the pricing does scale very differently. That might seem like a small detail, but if you're porting stuff from Star Wars, which is very easy to do in this setting, make sure you adjust those costs to better appropriately fit Android's costing of vehicles.
I mean, can I get a 5-finger discount on that?
Yeah, I was going to say, aren't you a hacker?
You absolutely could.
Or in saying that, you need to get to doing some serious favors.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So that's vehicles and equipment. Chapter 3, which is a big chunk of pages, is all about the net. It's basically it's amazing. I can't get enough of it. And it goes on it's got all the rules for net running and hacking and sysops and whatever else. It has a fantastic feature on page 127, which is a bit of a mud map of a network, which is a really handy thing to have. And I think that's probably designing networks is another episode entirely on how you can actually look at that, bring in ICE and how to run a network setting. So, look forward to that in future episodes.
I will mention this section of the book if you are planning on running a game and playing in a game, even if you're not running yourself, read this section back to front at least twice.
Yep.
Because it's a large part of the setting. It may seem overwhelming when you flip through it, but the running rules are actually pretty straightforward.
Yep.
And as you mentioned before, this example of a server is key. You as a GM want to have one of these when you're establishing a server for your players to run on. It's very easy to sort of hand wave it and just go, whatever, it's going to be this. But this is a large part of this setting's theme. And if this is done right, it's going to be a lot of fun for everyone at the table.
Yeah.
Because this is like it's an encounter essentially that doesn't involve weapons and guns and etc. It's all purely digital, but it has the same sense of danger of actual physical encounter. But yes, read these rules.
Yeah.
Well,
read them through and know them.
And one of the most important things to have nearby is a pen and paper.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yes.
One of the things that this looks like, you know what? It looks like zones. Just to throw back to last episodes.
A little bit. Like you could definitely, zones in this have a very very close relation, that's for sure. And
although it does run a little bit different.
It does run a little different.
Look, absolutely. But there are similarities to what we talked about in zones. So, yeah.
So another tip I would give here to your GMs out there, if you're planning on running an Android campaign, spend half an hour just to make some basic empty servers where you can either pre-put ice into them or not, or just have them blank so you can later put ice in. But just print these blank servers out, and you can just fill in the details with a pen and paper quickly on the fly and hand it to the players so they know what the run's going to be. It just makes your life easier. So you're planning ahead without having to leave it last minute.
Hey, if you've got a blank run for a car and they decide that they want to, for in the middle of the game and you weren't prepared for it, hack that police hopper.
Yeah,
bang, there you go.
And that's the other thing to take into consideration as well when looking at these is that you can just run, if somebody's like hacking a lock or something like that, it can just be a simple hack.
Yep.
It's a simple one skill check and they're in.
Yeah,
But if you want to go deep into hacking into an actual vehicle or some other sort of a smaller system that you want to make a little bit more of a highlight for the adventure, definitely go down the path of creating a network for it.
Yeah, don't feel obliged to make a network run for every single hack in the game.
Yep.
No.
Good rule of thumb is, if it's important to the narrative, make it a run. If it's just a random computers hacking role that a player wants to do something silly or something that's unplanned, that's super unimportant to the story, you want to keep the story moving, just make it a one-off roll. Add some boost dice and setback dice depending on how hard it might be in the situations involved. And don't be afraid to upgrade the difficulty to some reds, just so those despairs could come out. A player successfully hacks a police hopper, and rolls a despair though. Great, they've obtained control of the police hopper, but it's a shame that the entire local precinct, knows that car has been stolen.
And they have no idea because it's low jacked.
Exactly. So it's very, very interesting what you do with it.
Basically, the way that I would look at that is if they're gaining a massive advantage out of the role, like a massive storage advantage, you want to have something.
Yeah.
Make it interesting, yeah.
Because how often do you get like a normal, especially in Star Wars, where you just go and make a computers check? Often I've been asked, well, how long is it going to take for me to get through this system?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you kind of go, well, it's probably going to take you 4 rounds. Well, that character's sort of sitting there for 4 rounds, not doing a lot.
Yeah.
Where if you want to make it such that it's going to take, in your mind, it's 4 rounds, well, that's probably 4 sort of trees or 4 nodes.
Well,
It depends.
Something like that.
But
rounds don't necessarily equate to nodes, but you're on the right wavelength, for sure.
Because you can make it like, how long's a piece of string?
Yeah, exactly.
Because it may only be a couple of nodes, but it might take them a while to break that ice.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you recall as well, when you guys were trying to hack that cargo ship that was bearing down on the city, I also gave a heap of unprotected servers that were very, very tantalizing in there that gave you money and whatnot. However, each one of those you went into would basically take another round to get into.
Yeah.
And you're against a death clock. So you're like, oh, do I risk it and go for that? As a GM, you can dangle lots of carrots within a run and really tempt players. Like, oh, there's 3,000 credits sitting behind this piece of ice. But what's that ice? I guess you're going to have to find out. And then the runner gets curious and he goes and encounters this piece of ice and then his rig explodes and his brain melts out of his ears. That 3,000 credits isn't going to do much for them now they're dead.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, 3,000 credits does not buy you a brand new brain. So,
Well,
Mean.
well, maybe.
I've gotten
It is
by.
Shadow of the Beanstalk.
That's correct. And I will add, I've gotten by my entire life without a brain.
Good Lord.
I neither feel or care.
So if anybody is looking for, when it talks to about the rules, with how to spend advantages, threats, despairs, and triumphs, on page 130, you will find a fairly lengthy chart there, which has all of those and some suggestions on what to do during a run.
Yes, GMs out there, punish your runners with threats and despairs. Don't not do it, because if they're making all these runs of impunity, then you're not doing it hard enough on them.
True. And even some of the ice itself also has things that it does with threats and despairs and whatever else as well.
Some really fun stuff with the ice. And if you're creating ice as the GM, then you can get really creative with what you do with it, because ice are artificial monsters essentially.
And once again, there's a lot of cards online to give you
There
ideas.
is a lot of cards, and all those
absolutely.
cards basically spell out what they do in either their fluff, their name, or their artwork.
Yep.
So much you can do.
In that regard, and this is more to Sam, if you're listening, I think that ice cards for adversary cards would be absolutely fantastic.
That would be actually.
Sam, if you're listening as well, it'd be a good way for you to reuse the art assets you can't use in Netrunner anymore. Just saying. And it's a good way you could expand the ice without having to release new books.
True.
You just release new card packs.
Yeah, true. Very good.
Come on, Sam.
Man, God.
Come on, Sam. All right, so we can talk to him more about that at the in the next
No,
episode.
we know he listens, so I'm just going to keep dropping the hints.
Exactly. We do know that he listens. He
All
does
those
listen.
wasted art assets, not doing anything. You
Look,
can put
I'm
on
sure
cards.
I'm sure they have plans within plans of what they're going to do with this setting, because it seems to be very, very popular.
I dare say if
which
we've
is cool.
thought of it, they've thought of it.
Yeah,
So.
of course they have. And so once we get out of the network, then we go really deep.
Did we just survive a run for the network?
We did just survive a run. Good job.
Yay.
No despairs in that role, that's for sure. And
Not
then
that we know of.
until the GM says otherwise.
The GM banked him.
Yeah, it's probably been banked for later.
Until Wizards of the Coast probably still was using the word Netrunner too much.
Cease and desist.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Sorry, Wizards.
And then we go into the fluff of the setting. Give some good examples of places the PCs can visit. And talks about how what the police can do, and all sorts of things. So, yeah, and some nice maps too.
Yeah. This section
Love
of the
that
book
map.
is not a small section. It is over 50 pages.
Wow.
Yeah, but this is what you want when you get these books.
This book, this is, when I read through the playtest initially for this, I was blown away. They just go through every single major territory of New Angeles and just give it a massive write-up. And for lore junkies out there, and for GMs wanting to play in the setting, you reading through this section of the book, you'll get endless ideas for plot hooks, for adventures, even character creation ideas if you're building a character. Read through this section. Even if you're familiar with the Android setting, go through here, because this gives you a very, very zoomed in angle on all of the locations and the fluff and story that unfolds in those areas.
Yep.
Really paints a picture.
And it's also got some cool NPCs. They're named NPCs. But some cool Nemesis.
Nemesis.
I do have to ask. When we were doing the playtest, you had another book that had some really good setting information in it.
Yes.
What was that?
It's actually recommended in this book. In the very first few pages of the book, it's called The Worlds of Android. It's sold by FFG. It basically, I would say it is a requirement for, if you're deep into this setting and want to GM it or play in it, pick up The Worlds of Android. It basically gives a massive overview of everything Android in terms of the lore, the history, the background, etc. Whilst this book focuses heavily on New Angeles itself, the Worlds of Androids gives an entire overview of it. And there's a lot going on in terms of the war that unfolded between
The
Earth,
World's War.
the World's War, that's right. All the events of that. The fall, that basically, the blackout, which destroyed the old networks of our today's standards. The internet crumbled, and that's when the new network rose up, essentially. But yeah, it's a good book, and I am still kicking myself because at CanCon I saw a copy of it for $5.
Yes, we mentioned that.
Well, I didn't. I looked at it because I already owned a copy of it. I thought, $5, I should really buy this. And the front cover was torn, admittedly.
Right. Okay.
And I know, but me as a book person, book snob, I was like, well, that simply won't do for $5. and I put it back down. Then GM Hooly said, you should grab it. Then we need to keep it on the table for other players. I'm like, that's a great idea. Why didn't I think of that? So I scurried back to the convention area where I saw it for sale for $5, and
it was gone.
Of course, it was gone.
So we do have Ian, GM Hooly, and I. We do have a copy each. So there's 2 copies floating around.
Yeah.
But get it. It's cheap. You hunt around for it. It's a great fluff book. FFG, Sam, if you're listening, release it with this book in one of those cool folders or something like that.
That would be amazing.
Oh, that would be cool.
That'd
I'd
be
buy
very,
that.
very cool. Absolutely. And then, so after we go through all of that, then we have another big chunky section, which is all of the adversaries.
It's such a good section.
And he's got, this is Star Wars level number of adversaries.
I'd say more, to be honest.
There's a massive amount, which is great. I mean, obviously, if you can get the cards as well, the adversary cards, I'd highly recommend getting those for having at the table.
I'll take a cut now, thanks, Sam.
But yeah, definitely get those adversary cards. They do make the GM's life so much easier.
The cardstock they're printed on as well, I might add.
Yep.
It's magical.
Yeah.
They're real thick cardstock. I don't know what it is, but I just can't stop touching them.
I don't know.
You really love a good thick cardstock, don't you?
Absolutely.
Wow.
It slides into my card sleeve magnificently.
Stop it right now. Oh dear. Okay.
Anyway.
All right.
Talk dirty.
Also, I might add,
yes,
this book provides.
Oh, do we want you to add more to that?
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. This book has by far the best smell of any GeneSys book so far.
that's right. You do have the rating of your book smell.
It was a magnificent smell.
Wow.
And I was quite enamored by it.
That's disturbing. You're clearly very tactile, Michael.
Some have said that.
Just very quickly, what I do want to mention, because we talked about this before we started broadcasting, was that in the it looks smaller than Terranov. What was that?
Nothing.
He's in a certain frame of mind.
Clearly. I'll try that again, shall I? Oh, dear. So, yeah. Shadow of the Beanstalk does look to be a thinner book than Terranov. But in actual fact, there is, 2 or 3 pages difference?
I think it's one
page. 1 page difference. And obviously with Terranov, they've gone for that sort of thicker paper feel for that parchment feel, where this is more sort of like your traditional book. But they have jammed just as much, if not more, information into the same amount of pages, with the stupendous, that's a big word, artwork that we've come to expect from FFG. And they do not disappoint. This book is just gorgeous.
I was expecting good things, knowing, because they have an entire library of artwork sitting in their FFG supercomputers.
Yep.
But, I was expecting something amazing, and I was blown away by how much more amazing than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
It's got new art in it as well. It's not just recycled art, which, I have no problem with, because the artwork in Android is some of my favourite. But they've got even new things, as well as some of the best stuff from the card game too. So it's sensational.
Now, before we get into the last section, which I think is pretty important, of the book, let's talk about artwork, since we're talking about artwork.
Wait, I'll stop you right there.
Yes.
One last thing talking about NPCs.
Yes,
before I distract everyone with the smell of the book discussion. unlike Terranoth, which was one of my issues with the book, and I know a few other people's, as the NPCs aren't scattered about in the book. They are all in one section. They are arranged.
Yes.
They are arranged in theme, but they are all share one section of the book.
Yep.
So you can find what you want if you haven't got the cards. Thanks, Sam. And in one pile, you can just get your NPCs very, very quickly.
Yep.
I love how Terranoth has done it. They've put the NPCs with the environments they come from.
Yeah.
But at the same time, from a practical purpose, it can be a bit of a nightmare trying to track down, especially reskinning monsters.
Yeah.
Yep.
You're using one monster from one area as something else in another area. You have to flip back and forth to try and find them.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult to do. So that's, to me, is one of the biggest improvements, intentional or not, that the Android book has over Terranoth, in my opinion.
Very true. Very, very true. So, yeah, artwork. Michael, what was your favourite piece of artwork from the book?
It was a hard pick for me, to be honest, because it's 100% my jam, this entire book. But my favourite of them all was very early on, and you'll find it on page 8. And it's a full page of a non-disclosed section of the of New Angeles street, sort of high-risey, build-up slum areas.
Yep.
It's, I don't know, to me it speaks volumes because the image has the Beanstalk centralized smack bang in the center of the image, and it seems like it's very, very close, but when you think of how large that space elevator is, it gives you a sense of how far away it is.
Yep.
It's obscured by like the atmosphere. It's got that blue haze. That's how far away it is, because the Beanstalk pole itself is ginormous in terms of like how wide it is and how much cargo and freight goes up and down it all the time.
Yep.
And in this image, it's a thin little spire that disappears into the clouds. So you can't help but think it's a tiny little thing, but actually it's this immense object so far away, it's almost inconceivable. But my favorite part about it is the built up like slum buildings. It's very Singapore, I think has the slum towers like this.
Yep.
I think it's Singapore. Correct me if I'm wrong. Or maybe it's Bangkok. I'm not sure. My geology isn't great, but I know where New Angeles is.
Geology.
That's fine. Exactly. But no, seriously though, I love this artwork because it just gives you a sense of what Android is about. You have the poor living on top of one another essentially, whilst the elites live in high, gleaming towers that overlook everyone else. And the best part about this image, if you look very, very closely on top of the slum building on the right bottom side of the page, you'll notice like a playground or a football field or some such with kids and children sort of playing on a very, very mundane sporting activity on top of this, kilometre high tower.
Wow.
It's just very, it's very, very cool. It just paints it.
Yeah, it certainly gives a sense of scale straight up.
It does.
So
it's so good. You have all the air vehicles flying about. It's such a good piece of art, and I think it's in contention for what should have been on the front cover, namely because it has the Beanstalk on it.
Yeah.
But I think what they chose for the front cover is also very good because it gives a very personal feel of the street level of New Angeles, being in the shadow of that Beanstalk as well. Both are good.
Martin, what's your favourite piece of artwork in the book?
Well, I mean, I absolutely love all of the artwork in the character creation section.
Yep.
But the first picture there on page 19 of the guy sitting on the bike.
Yeah.
That was one of mine with Robo Penguin.
Yes, he's got the penguin strapped to the front. It's like taped on.
What? What do you mean, Robo Penguin?
He's like a robot. He's got
really
glowing eyes and stuff.
My God, I didn't even realise that. That's insane.
But I love it. He's just sort of like, riding along casually with his penguin.
It's a big old homage to Akira right there. It's Tetsuo on his red motorbike. It's fantastic.
One of our friends who actually was involved in the playtest, Andrew Scott, shout out to Andrew. It kind of looks like him.
It's very striking to Andrew, actually.
So he's sort of like, cause he's obviously gone and bought it and opened it up, and I think he sent us a message to go, is this me? So I'm pretty sure it's not Andrew, but no, it's uncanny. So yeah, very cool. Kaitlin, what was your favourite?
So this is a really difficult question to ask me, along with what I want to eat for dinner tonight. So I haven't made a single choice of just one.
Wow.
I have gone through and I've actually listed out all of my favorite ones, which you'll actually notice has a very common theme, which is where all the animals come in. On page 39, there is a real, it was actually one of probably, if I was going to say one of my most favorite photos, it's toss up between page 39 with the girl with the dragon backpack looking thing and the little dragon has got this eye patch and it's just absolutely adorable. Plus she looks really cool.
Right.
I keep on looking at types of characters that I would want to play, and she would be one that I would probably pick as terms of like aesthetics.
Yeah.
On page 67, there is a Lara Croft circa Cyberpunk 2077, which I think looks really cool. As soon as I saw that, I just laughed because all I could think of was Lara Croft. So that tickles me a little bit. Then on page 241, there is an amazing photo of this awesome dragon. Again, I have a thing for dragons, so I tend to pick them out in any book that I have. But that really stuck out to me. Plus, on page 15 and 19, Robo Dog Puppy and a Robo Penguin. Like, amazing. If you were trying to sell the setting to anyone who's anything like me, just mention the fact that they have miniature animals like the miniature giraffes, robot penguins, robot puppies, and they're going to start playing. That's when you then introduce them to the horror side of, eyes melting out and that kind of stuff when you have Michael Des GMing.
There's a high chance of it.
Yeah. But robo puppies.
It's a shame you can't see the puppy anymore because your eyes have melted.
You know that they're there. That's all that matters.
Wow. So,
but yeah, it's so hard. All the artwork, as everything that FFG does when it comes to bringing to life through the imagery is just amazing. Like, I absolutely love every picture in this book.
I give 25 out of 10.
Indeed.
Yes.
How about you, GM Hooly? What is your favourite art?
For me, I've got two of them. But I've unlike Kaitlin, I've decided on one specific one. But the two that really sort of spoke to me was the artwork that they used to explain the Risty character, because I'm a bit of a giraffe fan.
It's pronounced giraffe. We have been through this.
Yes, we did this before the episode. Anyway, so yes, the little giraffe. That's really cool. And but the other one, the one that sort of spoke to me the most, and it's only a small little bit in the corner. And I'm going to sort of explain a little bit of my fandom here. And I'm just going to lose all cool. I'm a real big Rick Astley fan from way back in the 80s. And page 225, there is a reporter who looks as though that, he's in a bit of a tight spot. I think he's a reporter. I'm not sure.
He's a I think he's an anchorman, I believe.
He looks like something like that, but I'm not sure. But he's sort of pulling on his tie. Looks like he's in a bit of a bind, and the crowd is about to turn on him in the background. So
every time I see that, I can't help but look at and see Brad Pitt from Fight Club.
It does look a little bit like Brad Pitt there, doesn't he?
That sort of Brad Pitty sort of grin going on.
Yeah. So, but no, I just. That to me speaks a lot because of the adventure sort of hook that's associated with it.
So these two guys behind him in the image, right?
Yeah.
They look like they're about to roll him.
Yeah.
So he's about to get Rick rolled.
I was going to make that joke, but I didn't know how to, so I thank you, Michael, for that. You are my hero.
Oh, please let that be a thing.
Never going to give you up.
Never going
to let you down.
No,
I'm never going to give that one up.
So no, that's just yes. Please let that be a thing. Please let that be the inspiration for that photograph. That's great. Very, very cool.
Got him.
So that's the artwork. Absolutely spectacular artwork that's thrown in there. Mm-hmm. Now for the last section. Which goes on for a few pages, which is very, very handy.
The GM section.
The GM section. Now, I purposefully did not read this yet because I'm not GMing it for the moment. Yeah, lots of cool, interesting things by the looks of it. Mike, would you like to take us through very quickly?
Well, I'll admit I'm yet to go through it again since the playtest. So having the book only a couple of days has limited my time in diving through it. But a quick flick through that I've done on it so far, it just gives you basically a rundown how to handle different classes of player characters and NPCs and how they might interact and how they play and how to handle that. Because you can have upper class working with lower class, and that could cause some interesting clashes in terms of roleplay. So it's a good way to know how to handle that and how to best manage that at the table. It also does some really, really great gives some great advice, I should say, rather, on the living world and how to best provoke that, not provoke, be evocative of that across the table.
Yeah.
And how to get that across as players, to your players, rather. It also goes into detail about social encounters. And I think that is a very, very important part of the Android setting.
Absolutely.
Now, we all know that the GeneSys core rulebook has the detailed social encounter rules, but this one basically helps you, the rules they present here, or guidelines rather, help you know how to put that into your Android using the pre-existing rules and how they might change and shift slightly depending on certain scenarios. Very, very important read, because I think if you're running in this Android setting, social combats are a cool thing that you can chuck in and quite important, because so much can hang off a social encounter in Android, especially if you're dealing with, wealthy mega corporations and stuff like that. I know during the test play we had that social encounter with the giant cybernetic guy who wouldn't let you into the floating city.
Yep.
And you had to enter a proper legit social encounter with him on board of the tugboat, which took you out there. And you basically came to a agreement where he would escort you into the city, but he was never going to leave your side, essentially, because he didn't trust you.
He wasn't going to leave us unattended.
That was great, and it was such a pivotal moment because there was so much danger there. Because if one thing was said wrong, i.e., rolled badly, it could have turned violent very quickly.
Absolutely.
This giant cybernetic warrior and all of his lackeys that were with him. So again, don't overlook social encounters as the GM in this. But I think one of the really, really cool things in this book is the Android Adventure Builder, written by our friend Keith Capel.
Yes. So I've been just taking a look at this because, as I said, I've not looked at this at all. But basically talking about how to structure an adventure and what sort of elements can come into play, like, your hooks, your escalations, and then the climaxes. L5R does this as well. It talks about them briefly when you're talking about the hooks, the situation, and then the climax. And it sort of like steps you through about how to create an encounter. And that's something that sort of, there's a lot of books that don't do that. They sort of just explain what the setting is and whatever else. And I know that the Terranos didn't really cover that either. And I think this is an important page or a few pages on to help GMs who've never GM'd before.
I mean, we've sort of touched on building encounters before.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it would be good to have a closer look at that at some point and how we can apply it.
This is during the I ran one of these a users builder when I ran the test play, and what it does, as well as giving you an outline of how to build a builder, it also gives you some basic, gives you some templates that are very, very easy for you to, as a newer GM, to apply. And you have basically a different template for different parts of the story that's unfolding. You can pick and choose your template and apply it, and then obviously adapt it to your scene.
Yep.
So the book contains a heap of examples of what you could use, but there's nothing from stopping you as a GM writing down a heap of these examples in these templates of your own, and then pulling them out as you need them as you go.
Yep.
So it's a great source. So it's odd that it's in. Honestly, it's odd that it's in this book. I would have thought this would have been in the main GeneSys rulebook. To be honest, but it's still a great resource to have, even if you're not playing it.
Well, I mean, not everything always occurs to people.
That's 100% correct.
That order,
absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But yeah, it's a great section of the book, and it's not at all exclusive to Android. You can use it in any setting you're running, even non-GeneSys games.
Yep. because it kind of, without blowing my own trumpet a little bit, but I'm gonna, is that it follows very, very similar to the episodic adventure chart.
Yeah.
So you've got a hook, you've then got cliffhangers, you've got developments, which is kind of what that middle ground is, and then you've got the climax. So, I mean, I certainly didn't develop that. That is something that is normal storytelling.
Yeah.
It's the 3-act play. That's definitely useful, as Mike just said. That's definitely useful in any game.
Yeah, well, having an understanding of that is key.
Absolutely.
Then let us not forget about the index.
Is it an index
Very
that works?
useful. There's an index. Yeah. I appreciate, after running into a few games with no indexes or bad indexes, I'm glad this book has an index.
Was it the Star Trek book that has, it has the worst index
I've been recently playing the Batman Miniatures game.
It's worse, is it?
Which is a great game. I love the game. I've played it forever. However, the rulebook lacks a index.
Right.
At all.
It's so bad.
Oh, man.
But fortunately, we have an app on our phone which has all the rules on there anyway. So we have to go to a third-party app just to be able to reference rules easily.
Yeah, but that Star Trek one, man, like there's an index, but you can't search by what you would think you would search by. Like, it's just, I don't know. It's weird.
Control F on a PDF. That's the best button in the world.
Speaking of PDF, just for everybody so that they know, the PDF for Android Shadow of the Beanstalk will be available from Drive-Thru-RPG on March 5th. So, take a look through. If you are a PDF lover and you don't have room, like some people do, that you can go and do it on Drive-Thru-RPG. Nice. And it's a searchable thing, so if you're looking for stuff in a real hurry during a session, it's a great way to do it.
Well, it's also a range of a proper bookmark system as well.
That's true.
So you can quickly find, by section, what you want very, very quickly.
Yeah.
It's also worth mentioning, if you're not a PDF person, like I'm not a huge PDF person myself, I much prefer a rulebook, but just like the GeneSys rulebook, anytime there's a big update on errata, the PDF is also updated. Because you will be given and you get in your copy in your archive, in your library on Drive-Thru PDF is automatically updated, so you can just download the new version. Any changes are in there.
Because they've just done that with the GeneSys core rules. They've just updated that as well. So if you have purchased it previously, it will be automatically updated. So you can go and download that and being brought up to speed, and that incorporates all of the stuff from the errata, which is cool.
Yeah.
So generally, I would like to suggest that this book is definitely worth people's while. It is the second setting book for GeneSys, but it is definitely one that is required on your shelf, even if you aren't playing in the Android setting.
Yeah, there's plenty there to make it worthwhile. But
absolutely.
I want to combine it with Terranor and make like a bright setting or something.
Oh, yeah.
Can we just say Shadowrun? Something we all agree on that isn't bad.
So let's talk about that. Like, what sort of elements are in there that you can use to for your own setting if you've got one?
Gmods and cybernetics. Any sci-fi setting is going to use that.
Yeah.
Hacking. Like, even a modern-day game is going to use hacking.
Yep.
Those guns, they can cross-pollinate between modern settings and sci-fi and space opera. Like, it's all there.
Absolutely.
What I'd like to play, this is not going down the Shadowrun path at all, something a little bit different, because I think Shadowrun's like the obvious crossover of fantasy and sci-fi, or cyberpunk and sci-fi, cyberpunk and fantasy. But I think a cool setting would be a post-apocalyptic setting that's far future, that's mostly fantasy with elements of sci-fi. So you use Terranor as your core book, but then you have bits and pieces taken from the Android book here and there for various things.
It's almost like a steampunky sort of. You could use the same rules, but you have it more sort of from a I don't know, the way that it just what's the word I'm looking for? The way that it looks.
Yeah, the aesthetic.
Aesthetic, thank you. Right.
That is the
main
buzzword
word that I prompted this whole episode. Aesthetic.
I think
But it is the way I see it is like a fallen society.
Yes.
Like
Anthem
it was.
is actually a perfect example of a company.
Well, yeah, and
That must be the full front of my mind.
Well, they've even got the exosuits as well that you could even modify to be somewhat like javelins in this.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I would, but Emma, in English, part of some of the settings that I would do is even some of like your most basic ones. Like you could do a Blade Runner type one. You could do Detroit Becoming Human if anyone's played that game. That's just humans and androids essentially, but brought forward that moral dilemma of are they human if they have feelings and can think they have feelings or things like that. So if you wanted to do a bit more of a narrative ethical based game, which people out there might want to do, there's something like that, or even like iRobot, something like where it's not all cyberpunk but still has those elements to it. You could definitely do something like that and have something really, really cool. And I know I mentioned Alita Battle Angel. I just saw the movie just recently, so it's kind of in the forefront of my mind at the moment. But it fits. There's so many different things you could do. It's really exciting to see all these different books come out that kind of bring all of the movies and universes and things that from your head and from what you love, being able to have tangible rules to it and make it still fun. I don't think there's any rule or anything like this in there that really bogs it down or makes it difficult. It just enhances it and takes what you already know, but gives it that narrative twist that really brings it out in gameplay.
It's the biggest strength of the GeneSys setting. How they've outlined it is the fact you can seamlessly jam all these books together, and you, with no effort at all, you have your own unique setting.
Yeah.
You don't have to spend hours creating your own rules. You just go, I'm going to buy a Terranoth, an Android, jam them together, and this is your options. Build within the theme I'm presenting you. And I think I've said it before in previous episodes. The exciting thing is we're going to keep on getting more of these books. And every new book means more and more options are unlocked.
Yeah.
And that's exciting to me. Knowing what's coming next, who knows? But we know whatever it's going to be, it's going to work with Android and Terranoth in some way, shape, or form.
So, final thoughts. Was that it?
Buy this book.
Buy this
I
book.
was going to say that was kind of my main feeling about this book, was thinking of all the different worlds that I've grown up with and wanting to watched in movies or read in books, or just kind of thought up of my own, seeing so Cyberpunk's one of my most favorite. I know I'm nowhere near Michael in terms of it being my favorite, but it's been one of my most favorite settings to kind of live and breathe in. So to see this come out, like it's really exciting, and it's the rules that they've got in there, the different flavors that they have, just gives it its own unique feel to the GeneSys setting into RPGs in general. And I think that's really amazing. I'm really excited for this.
Yep.
Martin, any final thoughts?
I think it's pretty much all been said. You need this book.
Yeah.
Like,
I agree.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to shill for FFG or anything,
No.
but you do, like, of all of the books, of the settings that we know are possible.
Yeah.
These two that have come out first were the right choices.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And for the Robo Penguin.
Much love for the Robo Penguin.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know for me, I'm just looking forward to deep diving it a lot more and making it like my setting to run, if that makes sense. Like that being my thing. I've waited a long time for a book like this, and to finally have it is exciting.
Yeah.
It's going to be a road of exploration for everyone. Me, myself as a GM, and the players at the table. So it's an exciting time to be. It feels like discovering GeneSys all over again.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I think the one thing that I would like to throw into the mix as well, as far as how to combine things, if you just wanted to have a fantasy setting where trade and barter is the thing which is the most important thing, and you know, for whatever reason, only the royalty have access to actual coins, that the favor system is fantastic for that.
Yeah.
If you have different factions that exist in your world, that you can drag that without any of the sci-fi elements, you can just drag that across into your fantasy setting as well.
That is something that is worth getting this book for. Just for that.
I think I just had an awesome idea too. I'm going to say it.
Go.
Have your players create sci-fi characters using this Android book.
Yeah.
Okay, 100% sci-fi characters. They're on a ship going somewhere, or something happens, and bam, they're suddenly playing in a Terranoth setting.
They crash landed in a Terranoth setting?
A setting using the Terranoth rules, and they have to get by with all the advanced sci-fi stuff. It's a resource, though, that slowly depletes, and they're going to have to transition to the fantasy, the technology level of the world they're living in.
First time you roll a despair with that gun, well, you've not got any more ammo.
Exactly. And I think that again, you could only ever really do with this system, which has seamless integration of different rule sets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's so cool to think of, like, bam, you land, your sci-fi kill squad lands in a world full of dragons, goblins, and orcs. They have all the power until they don't have all the power. And then the first time the players have to pick up swords and plate armor, it's going to be a special moment.
Yeah.
Or even vice versa. Taking your fantasy characters and then putting them into Android and seeing how they'd interact with that.
That'd be cool.
Because you imagine an elf walking through and they're like, "Oh, who did your mods? Like, wow, that looks really cool." And they're like, "I was born this way."
Yeah, that'd be awesome. And it'll be really cool as well for like story fodder as well.
Yep.
Maybe your sci-fi characters or your fantasy characters who have their own special things, fantasy being magic, or in the case of sci-fi characters in the fantasy world, they get in a position of power where they can influence the world with their knowledge. So all of a sudden your fantasy world starts manufacturing plasma weapons, or your sci-fi world suddenly has an understanding of magic and runes.
Very true. Very true.
I'd keep that to myself.
But the power that these PCs could get because they introduced this unknown quantity into this world.
Lots and lots of different options, I think, for anyone who wants to buy the book. So yeah, definitely go out and take a look, buy the cards, the adversary cards. Also, if you are into the Android novellas as well, Undercity, which has been released at the same time as Shadow of the Beanstalk, it does have some stats for gear, I think. I'm not sure. I don't actually have it yet. It's been pretty hard to get here in Australia.
But it has some colour pages.
But it does have some cool pages for use in the Android setting as well. So go and take a look at that too. If you, the listener, have any questions that you would like to ask, either us or in the case of next episode that you want to ask Sam, send us an email to info@thedicepodcast.com. You can also, as I mentioned earlier, you can go to the Facebook page where we have a specific thread dealing with the questions that you can ask. There are various pages as well through GeneSys fandom. And you can also go to the FFG website where you can go to the forums and there is a specific question there. So if you do have any questions, let us know. Closing date for that is the 3rd of March. So make sure you get that in ASAP. We know that that's an early mark. I know that a lot of people, don't necessarily have the book yet, but we really wanted to hit this baby running. Now, as far as the book is concerned as well, if there are any elements that are inside the book that you want us to talk about during the show, either in the Q&A or as another topic. For example, if you want us to do an entire episode about net running or talking about the favours, let us know as well, so that we've got an idea of what you want to listen to on the podcast. So I think that pretty much covers everything that we wanted to discuss with the Shadow of the Beanstalk. As we've said countless times, go out, buy it, you'll love it.
You know what? As a overview of the book, I think it was pretty comprehensive. To be honest, like once we started to get going, we got going.
I agree. Very good. So, talking about questions, do you reckon that we should answer a couple of questions from our listeners?
Nah.
No?
Maybe we should go behind the screens.
I think so too.
Behind the screens.
And welcome to Behind the Screens, where we, the hosts of the show, will answer your games and rules questions regarding the GeneSys Role Playing Game. And this week we have a couple of questions. Flano, would you like to take us through the first one?
Sure thing. Robert K. on Twitter asks, what are some effective ways to create a feeling of menace or threat in a campaign, but without significantly increasing the risk of a TPK? For instance, there's a feeling of greater risk with Savage Worlds than GeneSys or FFG/Star Wars. Mechanically, I know the instinct is to do things like bring in negative wounds can kill, or double negative wounds, or make crits more lethal. But I feel like narrative elements have more fun without having constant mechanical threat, impacts, or cost.
This is a tough one. This is a tough one because it's easy to throw it at game mechanics and make it become insanely difficult. Like, has he suggested, or what has he suggested to avoid? Extra lethality on crits and negative wounds killing you, and etc.
Well, one of the reasons his example there, Savage Worlds, I think that is a system that is mechanically more punishing. So it's hard to replicate that without changing those. But we've got a couple of ideas.
Yeah, it depends on your story you're telling at the table. Obviously, in this case, Robert has a story or narrative that he wants to envision a sense of doom to his players, and have them feeling that dread in the pits of their stomach. It's hard to do as a GM, because you need to have a horror mindset or have that mindset to instill that dread. But to do that without, what I would suggest, bar how you tell the story, if you want to apply that in a mechanical sense without making it overbearing, something simple as not being able to recover strain.
Making it more difficult,
Making it more difficult to recover strain. And you can paint that as a sense of dread the PCs are feeling. And in turn, the players controlling those PCs are going to feel as well. Because no longer, every choice to spend strain is now a big decision to weigh in on. Do I just take this extra maneuver to do this thing? It's going to cost me 2 strain. I've only got 3 left before I hit my threshold. Do I want to do it? And it becomes this resource management at the balance, which in turn I think will have a carryover effect of making the player feel like they're under pressure all the time.
Well, that is something you can do as well, is wounds, making access to first aid patches and stuff like that limited.
Just take away painkillers,
or just make it a limited resource. Like getting new painkillers is something like maybe you're deep down in, like if we're playing Android, you're deep down in the bottom depths of the city. They don't get medical care.
No.
What happens if you take a bullet in the arm? But if you really want to drive home that idea of this is now the threat that this brings, is make it different to the norm. Establish a baseline of where everything sits. Have them drowning in first aid packs for the first part of the game, and then suddenly take it away from them. But it's going to highlight it as well.
But at the same time, you also have to be careful of taking away all the time.
No, that's true. This is not a thing you want to do all the time, but it will highlight in this particular instance something that you want to do, if it's just for one session or something. But if you're wanting to modify the whole setting, I think what GM Huzz has suggested is the best.
The strain recovery is a lot harder to do.
One of the things that I would suggest as well, just to sort of add to that, is that with med packs and first aid gear or whatever else, if you were doing a setting like The Walking Dead or whatever else, that at the start, a lot of gear that you use for defense, whether that be weapons or for healing injuries, etc., would be quite plentiful. That you might have to fight for it, but it'd be quite plentiful. But as you progress through the story, the rarity of those items goes up.
Yeah.
And so as your rarity goes up, it's harder to find. So you might have to be dealing with, your more scrupulous merchants or whatever else, and you're trying to get items which would be generally just like a rarity 3 or 4, but after a few seasons, in inverted commas, that you might find that finding med packs or weaponry ends up being like a rarity 10.
Or you have to start crafting your own. Another thing to mention as well is atmosphere. The atmosphere that you create in the game is what we're talking about at the moment, but the atmosphere you create at the table. So music, the way you dress the room that you're in, the things that you put on the table and the way that people interact with them is all things you can do to create that feeling of dread.
It's a good thing about psychology. It's all interlinked.
Yeah. So one thing that I want to try out at some point is, how in those games, those horror games, you'll start to hear like the heartbeat of your character, like pounding in the background of the music.
Yep.
I'd love to run, have the music going, but in the background, just slowly crank up a track of a heartbeat so that it gets louder and louder as we go through the,
And there's all sorts of, and I know we spoke about this in one of the last episodes as well. There is, and I was corrected on how it's actually spelled or said, is Sirenscape, which is a good thing that has all of these special effects thrown into there, and you can also have your soundtrack working as well. One of the things that we talk about atmosphere that I think it was, this is quite a number of years ago, we were running Call of Cthulhu, and the GM had an old shed at the back of his house, so we were doing like a Friday the 13th sort of like one-off Cthulhu game. And they'd set it up where you had to go through almost this like horror house to get to the gaming table. We had the whole thing was done by candlelight.
Yeah.
Which set that atmosphere so much. And we were playing, I believe we were playing sort of farmers in old England. That this sort of setting was based around, so as you say, atmosphere is one way that doesn't require anything at all to do mechanically, but as Michael said, the psychology behind it, you're in a different sort of mindset.
Well, I believe I think Kaitlin is a good example of like not necessarily a doom-filled psychology, but Chase ran his Christmas-themed RPG just recently, and didn't he have a heap of things going on in real life that sort of helped set the theme?
Yeah, actually what Chase did was part of the lore was when people were buried, they would have bells on their toes so that if they were buried alive by mistake, people would be able to tell that they're alive through the ringing of the bells. And part of that in the lore around the Christmas time is where you hear the ringing of the bells when you think of Santa Claus. But as we found out that that's actually what they were doing, and then we're on the table and everyone is asleep except for one person, and they go and walk near a window, and as they walk near the window they can hear the Christmas bells, and literally had Santa's Christmas bells going in the so we are associating the Santa's Christmas bells with, Christmas time, whereas given the lore of the story, we all had goosebumps because we know that those bells were not coming from Santa. They were coming from the graves that were all around the town, that of all the people that had just recently been killed from a slaughter. So that instantly right there, and particularly because that character was the only character that had heard it, and they have to then try and explain, I hear bells to the other ones who haven't heard anything like that, did add a definite feeling of dread about what was going to happen. And because this was a huge war battle, we knew just how many bodies there were that were actually had just been buried. So that made it even more scary.
Jingle bells, jingle bells.
Exactly. I was trying to think of like how to make the noise, and I'm not even going to try because it's just not going to work. But you know the idea, and having that what you associate it with, and then actually hearing what it was actually for. Very, very unsettling.
It's a bit of Pavlov's spell.
Exactly.
Condition response.
Exactly. But one of the other things I was going to add, in terms of how to add menace or just a feeling of threat when you are creating a campaign, and if you have the luxury of time, like if this is a character that it is a main one and is going to be the big bad maybe at the end of a campaign or so, I always find that it's really interesting to have them appear throughout the series, like throughout the episodes that you have. They might not necessarily, you might be able to get 2 or 3 hits on them, but it just seems to brush off as if nothing happened to them and they disappear. So having that thing of they're untouchable, or that they're so powerful right now that you can't even touch them, can add this definite feeling of whenever they walk into the room, dread until it's time to actually have the fight. That could be a really interesting way of adding that next level to it if you have the luxury of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because like even then it wasn't necessarily a bad... Well, it was a bad character from my perspective, but we had a character Mira in one of the sessions with you, Ian, and she would come in and out, and she would always survive. Yeah. Somehow.
She took my arm.
She did take your arm, your character's arm, absolutely.
Yeah. But, it's just the thing. Whenever she came up, like, my character hated her, but she was also incredibly terrifying to come across. So every single, because you just knew how powerful she was. There was only one of the characters at the time that could really go against her. But it was one of those things. Because she came up repeatedly, and because we always got bested, because not every time you have to go into a fight you have to be successful. Sometimes people can walk away. It really added to it and then it was also so satisfying when we finally got her in the end. I mean, for me as my character, it wasn't so great for Harris's character. He was very attached to her. But for me, I didn't like her, so it was good.
But so, as far as that character goes, she was, because she was an Inquisitor, she was not very intimidating to Harris's character as the only Jedi in the group. But ultimately, he was fearful of her from a psychological perspective because of the condition that had, or the circumstances that had drawn them together, and that was sort of this, unrequited love type thing. You can build tension in that way as well. So, but yeah.
As we're all sitting here discussing various things, I had a couple of other ideas that popped in my head regarding to this. On a more mechanical level.
Yes.
They could also distill some dread without overdoing it. Every check a player makes is always upgraded at least once by default. So there's always a red dice in every single check. So that increases the chances of threats and despairs. And despair is despairing.
But it doesn't have to be a bad thing. Like, it doesn't have to be a damage to the character. It could just be a...
If you don't overspend despairs but make them significant still, that could add quite a lot of weight to what's going on. Another idea I had was I borrow it from Eclipse Phase. When your character takes basically severe damage, they take crits, which is, we're all familiar with crits, but in Eclipse Phase, it doesn't micromanage the exact damage you take. Every level of a crit you have, you're just a -10 to your checks. Because it's a D100 percentile based system. But you could borrow a very similar mechanic and apply it to this. Every time you take a crit or some sort of severe amount of damage, or at some moment of time, you just apply automatic threat to all your checks, or an automatic setback dice to all your checks. So the player keeps functioning, but they keep functioning at a deteriorated rate. And if healing is harder to come by, they have to maintain with this constant weight on their shoulders of the fact that they're always up against it. And I know when we played a Dark Heresy setting ages back using the Eclipse Phase rule set, and the players were deep in an underhive where they had no resources at all. And there was, over the period of time, they're taking all this damage. And instead of micromanaging like limb loss and stuff like that, there was a -10. And by the time they finished the mission down the hive, every player was at least a -30, -40 to all their checks. And it just became this exhausting, ominous, wearing down their soul grind to complete this mission for the Imperium. And they did it, but it was just this, the players were psychologically just afterwards, because they finally managed to get out and heal, and it was this big, massive relief. And that stuck with all those players. They remembered it. They've since then always remembered that mission in the Underhive and how daunting and grinding it was, and for a very small but continuous effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hopefully, Robert K, that has answered your question. And thanks very much for sending us the question via Twitter, which is another option, obviously, that people can send us through those questions. So for our second question, our final one for tonight, Kaitlin, would you like to read us through?
Absolutely. So Andrew Jove on the FFG forum asks, how is the prepare weapon quality supposed to work? I'm confused as it seems inconsistent between different weapons. A pike has prepare 1. Do I prepare it at the beginning of combat or each attack? It makes sense to only prepare it once. Crossbows also have prepare, though, up to prepare 2 for repeating crossbow. Can I run and gun once I prepare it at the start of combat, or does the prepare quality represent the lengthy loading process of each shot?
Now, we had a very rigorous debate in relation to the way that the questioning worked in this regard. Now, for those that want to read on from home, The prepare quality, which is under equipment, it says items with this quality require time to set up before being used. The user must perform a number of preparation maneuvers equal to the item's prepare rating before using the item. If the item is a weapon, using it, in inverted commas, using it would be making attacks with the weapon. At your GM's discretion, moving with the item, being knocked prone with the item, or other disruptions may require the user to perform the preparation maneuvers again before using the item. So, Michael.
Well, I think in this case, when you're using a weapon that has prepare quality, every time you use that weapon, you have to prepare beforehand.
Yep.
Now, the rules I lent another way with this rule, but I think I've since been convinced with rereading and something that Sam's put up in a forum replied or a FAQ.
Yeah, so there was a FFG developer answered question for Star Wars, but it's the same
rule.
Same rule.
So we'll bring it over and apply it to here because that's the most logical thing to do and it makes everyone happy. But essentially, if your weapon has prepare and you use that weapon, you have to then prepare it again afterwards. Perfect example is a crossbow from Terranoth. You fire that bolt, you have to spend a maneuver to reload it and fire again. Now, the difference between that and slow firing, although on the surface level is very similar, slow firing is automatic. You don't have to do anything for that weapon to do its thing.
Yep.
It just occurs. Prepare requires you to manually do a maneuver. And the example that the question gave us is a pike. And I think GM Flano has summed that up perfectly. And why you would have to prepare that every single time.
Well, basically, it's a footman's line weapon. So it's used in a formation. And so, you've got to brace yourself every time you're taking an attack on that weapon. Yep. But if you're using it by yourself in a sort of a open area, you've got to. It requires a lot of swinging about, a lot of leverage to put behind it to get that, or you're once again bracing yourself to get that leverage behind it.
So it's
handy. So from a logic perspective, basically, if it says using, it obviously means making an attack. That's what the rules say. Yep. But Sam has also qualified that as well by basically saying exactly that as soon as you make an attack, you must do the preparation maneuvers equal to the rating of the prepare quality that is on the weapon.
Yep. It's important to keep in mind that that distinction only really applies to weapons because every time you use the weapon, you have to do the prepare. Yep. Other items which may have prepare, which is most often weapons, but it can be other things. Once the prepare is set up and done, it can just be used continuously until it needs to be prepared again.
Yep.
Perfect example is the bipod mount. Again, from Star Wars. I think it might even exist in Android now. But if you want to reduce your big gun's encumbrance by a certain value, you need to prepare that bipod.
Right.
Once that bipod's prepared, you don't need to continue preparing that bipod every time you fire the weapon because it's already set up. If that weapon innately had prepare itself, then the weapons prepare would have to be prepared every time you shoot it, but not the bipods. However, that's where the GM's discretion come into play. If something occurs and knocks your bipod over, you're going to have to prepare it again and set the bipod up
before you use it. Because as it says in the rules, using if the item is a weapon, using it would be making attacks with the weapon.
Yep.
So I know it says attacks, but it's meaning an attack.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. So it's once you sort of unravel it, it's pretty straightforward.
Well, hopefully that answers your question, Andrew Joe. Thanks very much for sending that through to us. So I think that brings us to the end of another episode. If you have any questions like these, fine folks have provided us on the show. You can send us an email, as I mentioned before, to info@thedicepodcast.com or post your questions to Facebook and Twitter. There's plenty of great community members who will offer you some great advice, including us, and you may be lucky enough to get your question answered here on the show.
You can also find us via our website, the dicepoolpodcast.com.
Also, make sure to like and follow the Dicepool Podcast on Facebook and Twitter by searching at Dicepool Podcast. We also have our community group that is full of all your activities and work, which is amazing to see.
You can find us on YouTube by searching at Dicepool Podcast and on Discord via the D20 radio channel as well.
Very cool.
You forgot something.
Oh.
All hosts, general banter.
Oh. Right, that's directly from the show notes. Anyway.
We're talking about your show notes.
How do we keep all of this whole thing together, Michael? Jeez, I don't know.
It's like how I keep my life together.
Well, I think that's a wrap, guys. Yeah, definitely go out, buy the Android book. I think we've said it about 5 times now. So, yeah, definitely go and take a look at that. It is worth the price of admission for sure.
If you were on the edge because you weren't sure if it was going to have things in it that you can use in other games, get it. It's got plenty.
Definitely. And if you haven't gone out and bought Terranoth, what is wrong with you? So, definitely the setting books are fantastic. They can be used across the board for your own settings as well as the settings that FFG has provided themselves. Very, very much worth it. Well, I think that's a wrap. So I'm GM Hooly.
I'm GM Huzz.
I'm GM Flano.
And I'm GM Kaitlin.
And by our powers combined, I am Captain No One. Hang on a second. So...
Captain Lame, more like it.
Oh, dear. But anyway, so we are the Dicepool Podcast, where adventure is just a roll away. The Dicepool Podcast is a proud member of the D20 Radio Network. For more information about the network, visit www.d20radio.com. The Dicepool Podcast is a fan-generated podcast. All of the information provided on the podcast and related website are not affiliated with Fantasy Flight Games or any of their licensors. The content of this podcast remains the property of the Dicepool Podcast and is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The GeneSys Role Playing Game, GeneSys logo, content, and all material remain the property of Fantasy Flight Games.